The summer air at Detroit Dragway in 1962 smelled like burned rubber and racing fuel. Engines screamed at over 6,000 revolutions per minute. The Christmas tree flashed green. Two cars launched so hard their front wheels barely touched the pavement. The crowd expected Chevrolet to win. They expected Ford to fight back. But instead, a strange-looking Dodge with a giant hood scoop stormed past both of them as if they were standing still. By the time it crossed the finish line, the scoreboard showed a number that left everyone silent. Dodge had just fired the opening shot in what would become one of the fiercest horsepower wars America had ever seen. But what almost nobody knows is that this victory wasn't supposed to happen. Just months earlier, Dodge wasn't leading the drag racing world. It was desperately trying to catch up. Engineers were running out of ideas. Racers were switching brands. Chevrolet's legendary 409 was dominating headlines, while Ford's powerful 406 FE V8 was winning fans every weekend. Then Chrysler's engineers made one decision that changed everything. Instead of building a completely new engine, they took one they already had and transformed it into a monster so violent that even veteran drag racers admitted it scared them. That engine became the 426 Max Wedge, and for a brief, unforgettable moment, it turned Dodge into the undisputed king of the quarter mile. Most people know the legendary 426 HEMI. It's the engine that usually gets all the attention, but the real story started before the HEMI ever arrived. The Max Wedge was the weapon that laid the foundation, embarrassed Detroit's biggest rivals, and proved that raw engineering could beat reputation. You think you know Dodge's drag racing history? Not like this. To understand why the Max Wedge mattered so much, you have to go back to the early 1960s, when America was completely obsessed with horsepower. The interstate highway system was expanding. Young Americans were buying performance cars in record numbers. Every weekend, thousands of racers packed local drag strips across the country. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday wasn't just a slogan anymore. It was a business strategy. General Motors understood that. Ford understood it. Chrysler understood it too. Every victory on the drag strip translated directly into showroom traffic. And Chrysler needed victories. The company already had powerful engines. Its famous RB Series Wedgehead V8 had proven itself reliable in heavy Chryslers and Imperials. Introduced in 1959, the RB engine featured a raised deck block that allowed a longer stroke than the earlier B-Series engines. Strong cast-iron construction, deep skirt block architecture, and oversized main-bearing webs made it one of the toughest V8s Detroit had ever built. But toughness alone wasn't enough. Chevrolet's 409 cubic-inch V8 had become a national sensation. With its unique combustion chamber design and aggressive factory tuning, the dual 4-barrel version produced up to 409 horsepower and around 420 pound-feet of torque. Lightweight, full-size Chevrolets equipped with the 409 were dominating NHRA classes, while Ford answered with its own FE Series 406, producing as much as 405 horsepower in triple 2-barrel configuration. Chrysler suddenly found itself chasing both rivals, and that wasn't acceptable. Inside Chrysler's Highland Park Engineering Center, a small group of performance engineers received one simple assignment: build the fastest factory engine in America. Money wasn't unlimited, time wasn't unlimited, failure wasn't an option. Rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper, the engineers focused on the proven 413 cubic-inch RB engine. It already had a rugged bottom end, generous cylinder wall thickness, and excellent durability under sustained high loads. But durability doesn't win drag races, power does. So they began pushing every dimension they safely could. The bore was increased from 4.1875 inches to a massive 4.25 inches, while retaining the 3.75-inch stroke. That increased displacement to 425.6 cubic inches, officially marketed as the 426 Max Wedge. That quarter-inch increase in bore doesn't sound dramatic today. Back then, it was enormous. The larger cylinders allowed bigger valves, improved airflow, and dramatically increased breathing at high RPM. Engineers knew they were approaching the physical limits of the RB casting. Go much larger, and cylinder wall integrity would suffer under repeated full-throttle launches. They were building right on the edge. Compression ratio jumped to an astonishing 11.01, requiring premium high-octane gasoline. This wasn't an engine designed for easy commuting. It was built for one purpose: winning. The cylinder heads became one of the Max Wedge's greatest weapons. Massive wedge-shaped combustion chambers housed oversized 2.08-inch intake valves and 1.88-inch exhaust valves. Intake ports were raised significantly compared to the standard RB heads, allowing incoming air to flow more directly into the cylinders with fewer restrictions. Airflow was everything. The better an engine breathed, the more fuel it could burn. The more fuel it burned, the harder it accelerated. But Chrysler wasn't finished. Sitting on top of those enormous heads was an aluminum cross-ram intake manifold, unlike anything Detroit had seen before. Instead of placing both carburetors directly above the engine, engineers mounted two massive Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors at opposite sides of the manifold. Each carburetor fed cylinders on the opposite bank through exceptionally long intake runners. At first glance, the layout looked almost backwards. It wasn't. Those long runners used the natural pulse of incoming air to pack more mixture into each cylinder at racing RPM. Modern engineers call this ram tuning. Chrysler racers simply called it free horsepower. Factory output was conservatively rated at 415 horsepower at 5,600 revolutions per minute and 470 pound-feet of torque at 4,400 revolutions per minute. But almost nobody believed those numbers. Insurance companies were beginning to monitor horsepower ratings. Racing organizations classified cars based on advertised output. Manufacturers had every reason to underrate their engines. Dyno testing performed by independent racers frequently suggested real output was closer to 450 horsepower in factory trim. With careful tuning, open headers, race ignition, and optimized carburetor jetting, many Max Wedge engines comfortably exceeded 500 horsepower. That kind of power in 1962 wasn't just impressive, it was terrifying. But there was one problem. All that power meant absolutely nothing if it couldn't survive repeated launches at full throttle. And that's exactly where the real nightmare began. Engine durability had become the biggest obstacle standing between Chrysler and total domination. Making horsepower on a dynamometer was easy. Keeping that horsepower alive after launch was something else entirely. Every drag race lasted only a few seconds. But those few seconds were brutal. The moment the driver dumped the clutch, thousands of pounds of force slammed through the crankshaft, connecting rods stretched under incredible loads. Pistons changed direction more than 100 times every second near peak RPM. Rear tires grabbed the pavement so violently that entire drivetrains twisted under torque. One weak part, one oiling problem, one missed shift, and the engine could destroy itself before reaching the finish line. Chrysler's engineers knew exactly where to look. The forged steel crankshaft was already exceptionally strong, riding on 5 massive main bearings deep inside the RB block. Heavy-duty forged connecting rods replaced lighter production pieces, while forged aluminum pistons were designed to survive the punishment of repeated high-compression combustion. Every rotating component was carefully balanced because even a slight imbalance at 6,000 revolutions per minute could shake an engine apart. Veteran Chrysler engineer Tom Hoover later explained that the philosophy wasn't simply to build more horsepower, it was to build an engine that racers could trust every Saturday night. That trust became the Max Wedge's greatest advantage. The camshaft was equally aggressive for its time. High valve lift and long duration allowed those enormous intake ports to keep feeding the cylinders deep into the upper RPM range. Mechanical solid lifters demanded regular adjustment, but they offered precise valve control at engine speeds where hydraulic lifters often began to lose stability. This wasn't an engine that liked to idle, it wanted to race. Fuel delivery came from the famous dual Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors. Together, they flowed roughly 1,300 cubic feet of air per minute. Combined with the long cross-ram intake runners, the system produced exceptional cylinder filling once engine speed climbed above 3,500 revolutions per minute. Below that, the Max Wedge felt surprisingly civilized. Above it, everything changed. When both carburetors opened completely, the intake roar became almost as loud as the exhaust. Drivers often described the sensation as being kicked in the back. The torque arrived instantly, overwhelming skinny bias-ply rear tires that struggled desperately for grip. One NHRA racer later laughed, "You didn't ease into a Max Wedge, you hung on." And that was exactly the point. The exhaust system received just as much attention. Massive cast-iron exhaust manifolds, nicknamed dump truck manifolds because of their size, flowed dramatically better than conventional passenger car designs. Many racers replaced them immediately with tuned open headers, freeing even more horsepower. Dyno operators noticed gains of 20 to 30 horsepower simply by uncorking the exhaust. That extra power often meant the difference between winning and loading the trailer early. But there was another challenge, getting all that power to the ground. Horsepower alone doesn't win drag races, traction does. Chrysler engineers attacked the entire package, not just the engine. The Max Wedge cars received reinforced rear leaf springs, heavy-duty suspension components, stronger drive shafts, upgraded cooling systems, and larger brakes. Weight distribution was carefully considered, and racers quickly discovered that moving the battery to the trunk improved rear-wheel traction during launch. Transmission choices reflected the same philosophy. Most serious racers selected Chrysler's legendary A833 4-speed manual, prized for its strength and precise gear engagement. Others preferred the rugged TorqueFlite automatic, especially after discovering that properly modified automatics delivered incredibly consistent elapsed times. Consistency wins championships. The Max Wedge delivered it. Then came the proving ground, the NHRA Super Stock classes. This wasn't advertising anymore. This was war. At tracks across America, the Max Wedge finally met Chevrolet's celebrated 409 and Ford's powerful 406 FE, exactly where reputations were made or destroyed. The results shocked Detroit. Factory-backed Dodge and Plymouth teams immediately began collecting victories. Drivers like Dick Landy, Big Daddy Don Garlits, and Chrysler-powered dragsters and other independent racers quickly realized they had something special under the hood. Dick Landy became almost inseparable from the Max Wedge program. Calm behind the wheel but ruthless at the starting line, he repeatedly demonstrated just how devastating Chrysler's new engine could be. His meticulously prepared Dodge 330 became one of the most feared super stock cars in America. Fans began arriving early just to watch him stage. When the lights dropped, the front wheels often lifted clean off the pavement. Quarter-mile times that had recently seemed impossible suddenly became routine. Well-prepared Max Wedge cars were running the quarter mile in the low 12-second range at speeds exceeding 115 miles per hour. Some factory-supported racers dipped into the high 11s under ideal conditions. Remember, this was 1962. Many European sports cars couldn't match those numbers even decades later. Chevrolet teams weren't standing still. The legendary 409 continued evolving, producing impressive horsepower and proving incredibly competitive. Ford's FE engines also kept improving, especially with lightweight Galaxies built specifically for drag racing. But Chrysler had found something its rivals struggled to match: torque, massive, relentless torque. With approximately 470 pound-feet available in factory form and considerably more in race trim, the Max Wedge launched harder than almost anything wearing license plates. One magazine tester described the acceleration as violent enough to blur your vision. That was an exaggeration. Bias-ply tires of the era simply weren't designed for this much power. Smoke poured from rear wheel wells, axle housings twisted, clutches exploded, drive shafts snapped. Sometimes the engine survived, while everything connected to it failed instead. That became one of Chrysler's biggest compliments. Mechanics started saying the drivetrain had become the weak link because the engine refused to quit. But Chrysler wasn't celebrating yet. Because while the Max Wedge was dominating on Saturday nights, its engineers were already discovering that the competition was preparing something even more dangerous. And what Chrysler decided to build next would change American drag racing forever. Chevrolet wasn't giving up. Ford certainly wasn't. By late 1963, every major manufacturer in Detroit knew exactly what Chrysler had done. The Max Wedge had transformed Dodge and Plymouth from underdogs into the benchmark everyone else was chasing. Every weekend, drag strips across America became rolling laboratories where engineers quietly studied tire marks, elapsed times, and trap speeds. The horsepower war had become an arms race, and everyone was building bigger guns. Inside Chrysler, however, the mood was surprisingly cautious. The engineers weren't celebrating victories. They were asking a dangerous question. What happens when 426 cubic inches aren't enough? Because racing never stands still. Win one season, and your competitors spend the entire winter figuring out how to beat you. Tom Hoover and Chrysler's performance team had already pushed the wedgehead design close to its practical limit. Stage 2 and later Stage 3 Max Wedge packages improved the formula. Revised cylinder heads increased airflow, combustion chambers were reshaped, camshaft profiles became even more aggressive, and intake port geometry was refined. Factory horsepower ratings climbed from 415 to around 425 horsepower, depending on specification. Actual race engines, many dyno operators reported well over 500 horsepower. Some expertly prepared Super Stock combinations approached 550 horsepower. Throughout 1963 and into 1964, Dodge and Plymouth Max Wedge cars became nearly unstoppable in NHRA Super Stock competition. Dick Landy continued collecting victories, while racers like Della Woods earned the nickname Queen of the Super Stockers, driving a Max Wedge-powered Dodge. The engines simply kept winning. At major NHRA national events, Max Wedge cars regularly qualified near the top of their classes. Quarter-mile times dropped into the high 11-second range, with trap speeds approaching 120 miles per hour under ideal conditions. Most people don't realize just how serious Chrysler was about drag racing. If you ordered a lightweight Max Wedge package, you weren't getting luxury, you were getting speed. Many factory race cars deleted sound deadening, heaters, radios, wheel covers, and unnecessary trim. Thin steel body panels and lightweight components helped reduce weight wherever possible. Some versions even used aluminum front-end pieces and acid-dipped body panels to save precious pounds. Everything served one purpose: cross the finish line first. One Chrysler mechanic reportedly joked, "If it didn't make the car faster, it didn't belong on it." That philosophy worked. Magazine road tests from the era stunned readers. A well-driven Max Wedge Dodge could sprint through the quarter mile in roughly 12.0 seconds at around 118 miles per hour. With race tires, careful tuning, open headers, and favorable weather, experienced racers pushed them into the 11s territory reserved for purpose-built race cars only a few years earlier. Street cars simply weren't supposed to be this fast. The intimidation factor became almost as valuable as the horsepower. When a Max Wedge Dodge rolled into the staging lanes, competitors noticed the giant hood scoop, the unmistakable cross-ram induction, the deep, uneven idle from the solid lifter camshaft. Everyone knew what was coming, and then everything changed. Instead of refining the Max Wedge forever, Chrysler shocked the racing world by introducing something entirely different: the 426 Race HEMI. If the Max Wedge represented the absolute evolution of wedgehead engineering, the HEMI was a revolution. Hemispherical combustion chambers, nearly straight intake ports, even larger valves, far greater airflow. The famous elephant engine immediately demonstrated even greater high RPM breathing potential, producing an officially advertised 425 horsepower, though race-prepared versions quickly exceeded 550 horsepower, and eventually, much more. Ironically, the HEMI's arrival sometimes overshadows the Max Wedge today, but without the Max Wedge, the HEMI probably wouldn't exist. Everything Chrysler learned about airflow, combustion efficiency, durability, forged rotating assemblies, intake tuning, and high-compression drag racing came directly from the Max Wedge program. It was the laboratory. The HEMI was the graduate. As the 1960s progressed, factory-backed racing changed rapidly. New NHRA regulations reshaped competition. Insurance premiums for high-performance muscle cars climbed dramatically, in some cases costing young buyers more than the monthly payment on the car itself. Then came tightening federal emissions requirements and the Clean Air Act, forcing manufacturers to lower compression ratios and prioritize cleaner exhaust over maximum horsepower. The era of factory race engines was coming to an end. Production of Max Wedge-powered street cars lasted only a short time, primarily during the 1962 through 1964 model years. Historians estimate that only a few thousand genuine Max Wedge cars were built across Dodge and Plymouth combined, making authentic examples exceptionally rare today. That rarity transformed them into collector legends. A documented original Max Wedge Dodge or Plymouth can now command well into six figures at major auctions, with exceptional examples sometimes selling for substantially more depending on provenance, originality, and racing history. But for many enthusiasts, their real value isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in influence. Modern engine builders still study the Max Wedge's cylinder heads. Racers continue reproducing the famous cross-ram intake. Aftermarket companies manufacture faithful replicas of nearly every major component because demand has never disappeared. Even today, hearing a properly tuned Max Wedge at idle is unmistakable. The mechanical clatter of solid lifters, the deep pulse through long tube headers, the sharp bark as the dual 4 barrels snap open. It's more than engine noise. It's the sound of one of Detroit's boldest engineering experiments succeeding beyond anyone's expectations. Looking back, the Max Wedge accomplished something incredibly rare. It didn't merely produce impressive horsepower, it changed an entire company's reputation. Before it arrived, Dodge was fighting to stay relevant in America's drag racing scene. After it arrived, everyone else was chasing Dodge. That's an extraordinary legacy for an engine that spent barely 3 years in production. So the next time someone tells you the 426 HEMI made Dodge the king of drag racing, remember the engine that came first. The one with the giant cross-ram intake, the towering hood scoop, and enough torque to twist drivetrains into scrap metal. Because the 426 Max Wedge didn't just win drag races. It forced Detroit to reinvent the rules of horsepower, and without it, one of the greatest eras in American performance history might never have happened. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments which forgotten racing engine deserves the next deep dive. And if you love the hidden engineering stories behind legendary cars and engines, make sure to subscribe because there's always another incredible chapter waiting to be uncovered.